If you want to see Murphy's Law at play, there's no better way to do it than to travel. Because everything that can go wrong absolutely will. No matter how well you plan, it's unpredictable, often chaotic, and always full of surprises. And that's the beauty of traveling. I've always told people that I used to dream of being a travel writer. That's a bit of a lie. Growing up, I was never the ambitious kid. Plenty of my friends and peers seemed to have their futures figured out, but I had no clue what I wanted from life. I knew what I enjoyed, and while I loved unraveling the why behind everything, I never really applied that academically. So, without completely intending to, I found myself armed with a journalism degree, but no real desire to be a proper journalist. Then, I found myself interviewing for a magazine that didn't yet exist. And suddenly, I was a travel writer. I would love to tell you guys that it was at that moment that I found my purpose, my passion, or whatever you want to call it. But that would be a lie too. What I can tell you is that I had no idea what I was doing, but I was determined to figure it out. Because hey, I was getting paid to travel, and who doesn't want that, right? I clearly remember this one moment, a few months into the job, standing petrified on the side of a massive road in Vietnam. I needed to get across that road, but the traffic just never stopped. Our guide very kindly told me, just look straight ahead and keep walking. And no matter what, don't stop. And so, that's exactly what I did. On that road in Vietnam, of course, but even beyond that. I took it as a message to keep trying, to keep pushing myself to go beyond what I thought I could do, and to take those leaps of faith when I came across a gap in my path. It's how I was able to get myself to go coast-steering in Wales, which is a crazy sport that involves a mix of climbing along cliff faces and leaping into the Atlantic, or to get into frigid waters teeming with great whites. By the way, I have a gross and really funny story about that if anyone wants to hear it later. Or even to jump out of a plane. There's a lot of stuff that I never really imagined I could do. And even if I found out later that I still couldn't do it, I'm happy that at least I tried. I mean, if I didn't agree to hurl myself out of a plane, I never would have learned that sometimes you need to channel your inner banana. And that is a phrase that can apply to more situations than you might think. I've learned a lot through travel. On that same trip to Vietnam, the photographer and I went off book and snuck off on a kayak from a houseboat that we were staying at late one night. We paddled out to a floating village with no real plan. We were young and silly, and we thought we were having a great adventure. We weren't really. But we did end up having the most incredible half an hour, sitting in silence with people we couldn't communicate with, but forming connections nonetheless through gestures and food. This, in fact, quickly became one of my favorite parts of the job, discovering just how easy it can be to form bonds with people you couldn't imagine having anything in common with, if only you allowed yourself to be open and share a little bit of yourself with them. I've also learned that home, for me, doesn't have to be a place. About a year before I started traveling for a living, I got myself a tattoo of a turtle. And of course, I didn't tell my parents about it until after it was done. When my mother asked me why I picked a turtle, I told her it was so I could always have my home with me. If you haven't guessed, that wasn't completely true. I just thought it was an answer she would like. It did become true very soon afterwards, though. I had 15 years of traveling. I had many years of traveling, 15 days a month, not knowing what time zone I was in, not having spare time for anything that wasn't important. I missed out on a lot back here, and I lost connections with friends, and I had to learn how to prioritize what really mattered. Travel has also taught me to find joy in the little things. I know, it's one of those things that people say, but hear me out. I quickly learned that traveling for a living is not at all as glamorous as it sounds. Take this lovely photo of a loch in the Scottish Highlands, for example. We finally found this spot after driving for about 3 hours. And just as we set up, it started raining. So what you don't see here is a photographer and me kneeling on the uncomfortable gravel, me with a little cloth in my hand, wiping the rain off the lens after every single shot, just so that we could get that perfect one. But even after all of that, it still took my breath away. And I have never known frustration like this one day in South Africa, when we were desperately trying to capture this perfectly planned cover shot of a lion. But all we seemed to come across were dung beetles. But you know what? I now love dung beetles, and I can tell you more about them than you would ever want to know. I've also learned the value of keeping an open mind to things that at first glance seem completely pointless. It's how I felt on a disastrous trip through Jordan. We were there in August for some reason, when temperatures are at their highest. And I could literally feel myself becoming dumber in the heat. Towards the end of that trip, I was ready to call it quits and head home, even though we had one more stop to make that I really didn't want to do. But I pushed myself. So there we were, in tents in the desert, where even at night it was unbearably hot. And all we had to sleep on were these smelly goatskin rugs that just made everything worse somehow. In frustration, I grabbed my pillow and decided to sleep out in the sand. How much worse could it get, right? I still couldn't sleep, but it was hands down one of the most memorable nights of my life. Because out there, in the middle of nowhere, as I smacked bugs off my overheated, exhausted self, I was treated to the most gorgeous display of stars I have ever seen. It felt like every time I opened my eyes, I spotted another shooting star streaking across the sky. More than anything else, though, I have learned that if I let myself, I can handle anything that the world throws at me. Most of my memories of traveling aren't of the beautiful, exciting things that I wrote about, but rather things that I can laugh over now, but were just plain bizarre when I was actually living through them. Imagine receiving a call from your boss about needing to replace a GoPro mid-trip. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? I thought so too, until we got to the part about why it needed to be replaced. You see, the photographer and him were in this beautiful national park in Costa Rica, and they were making us all jealous with the amazing things they were doing. They came across a bridge spanning a river with a whole lot of crocodiles lounging about on the muddy banks. Must get photos, of course, but the ones they were getting from the bridge weren't good enough for them. The solution they came up with? To get a bunch of rope and lower the GoPro down to croc level. And of course, the contraption needs to be weighted down so it stays stable. In a moment of sheer brilliance, I don't think I will ever be able to surpass, they decided to use a pineapple and not any of the rocks that were lying around them. So, to the bewilderment of the small crowd gathering around, they tossed the rope, pineapple, and GoPro contraption over the edge, and then were shocked when a crocodile promptly snapped it all up and swam away into the river. So, you might find yourself stuck on a mountainside in Sikkim with a sprained ankle and no way back to civilization apart from walking, or emptying out the reserves in your bank account as you scramble across Istanbul to buy an overpriced camera lens because yours broke on day two of a trip, or even at the receiving end about a phone call about a GoPro that was eaten by a crocodile. But you will learn to lean on others when you need help, to troubleshoot on the fly, and sometimes to just laugh it off. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I don't think I found my purpose either. And you know what? That's okay. I spent a decade at Lonely Planet magazine as part of the editorial team, working up the ranks from a features writer to the associate editor. And for the past 6 years, I've been running a content and digital marketing agency. It's a completely different life. I've hung up my travel shoes and now wear Boss boots. And my days are spent thinking strategy and managing people rather than figuring out how to read a map in Greek or finding the best spots for a sunset shot. But the skills I acquired while traveling enabled me to do what I do now. So even though I'm not sure where I'm going to end up, what I do know is that I love to discover. I love to ask myself why, and ask others that too. I love pushing boundaries, and I love giving in to my own curiosity. The very long-winded point I'm trying to make here is, challenge yourself. And I'm not just talking to the students here. This is for everyone. Get out of your comfort zones, take those leaps of faith, and push yourself to try something different. You never know what you might learn. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Radhika, for that fascinating glimpse into the world of journalism and beyond. We'll take audience questions. We have time for about 2 questions per speaker, I think. So if there's anyone in the audience that would like to ask Radhika anything, please raise your hands and a mic will be brought to you.
I'm very happy to not have any questions.
Is there a mic handy?
The growth
Yes,
story,
what's the
I
growth
don't think
story
it's safe
about
to say
the-
on stage. I'll talk to you about it later.
Okay, Parvati has a question.
It involves vomit. That's what. Yeah. But it's also very funny.
Okay, what's the most difficult trip you've experienced and why? How did you overcome the difficulties you faced?
That's a tricky one. It depends on how you define difficult. From a logistical perspective, it would probably be a really, really bizarre trip to Turkey where, like, Murphy's Law really, really kicked in at that point. That was where the camera lens broke. And then the tripod broke. And then we were staying 2 hours away from where we needed to be every day. It was just one of those badly organized trips, completely on accident. But from a work perspective, I would probably say Sri Lanka. It's gorgeous, but I just found it very, very difficult to find something to write about because it feels almost like home in a very, everything that you go to see there is very similar to home. So I had to find a way to work with that rather than trying to get over that. So making it sound like a home away from home rather than making it this exciting, new, different experience is how I dealt with it.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on to, yeah? there's one
Sorry,
more?
I
Oh,
had a question, if I may. You moved on from this really exciting world of travel to your current place of work, which I'm sure is equally exciting. But how do you bring the joy of discovery and wonder in a more conventional job that you pursue right now?
So I think it's very much a matter of perspective. My current job is only exciting because I trick myself into thinking that it is. Very honestly, especially compared to the sort of excitement that I was used to in my previous job. But I tackle things by making them challenges for myself. Figure this out today. This is your project for this month, is to learn this new skill or to figure out how to tackle this client and so on and so forth. So it becomes challenging, it becomes exciting, and I'm constantly learning in the process. Because otherwise I would get bored really, really quickly.
Yeah, I think there's one last question.
Hi.
Hi.
I think there are some people who like aren't that fond of traveling and like would rather just stay in the comfort of their own home or in the comfort of their own like city, country, whatever it is. What would you say to them in terms of, firstly, would you agree with that perspective? And if not, how would you persuade them to be okay with?
That's
Yeah.
an interesting question. I don't think it's a matter of persuasion. Again, it comes back to how you look at things, right? Coming to school every day, you're traveling in that sense, right? You're pushing yourself out of your cocoon and you're experiencing something new. If you decide to take up a sport, you're traveling in your life. You're doing something new. You're exposing yourself to new people. So I think the whole experience overall is about just stepping a little bit outside your comfort zone. So it's not so much about you must travel because there's so much. I mean, I could spend my entire life traveling in India and still not see all of it, right? So there is an incredible amount of stuff to see wherever you are. In Bombay, I don't know Bombay well at all, right? I might have gone to other places, but I couldn't take you around Bombay if you asked me to. So it's just about allowing yourself that little bit of space to explore whatever, within whatever you're comfortable with until you get more used to the idea of what travel is.
All right, thank you very, very
Thank
much,
you.
Radhika.